Okay, YouTube audience, welcome back. This is part 3. After our regular show, we're continuing our topic with Clockwork Orange. And where did we leave off? I think we were about to the point in the story where we're almost done talking about the movie itself. I think we've kind of sprinkled in a lot of evaluation of Kubrick's technique and a little background information about him. But we were talking about Alex. We were talking about the Ludovico treatment and what it did. And I just wanted to go to the chat real quick because I saw a comment from Nitro 9A.
Isn't that Celestino?
That is.
Yeah. We know that person, I bet.
Now I can't find it.
Oh, no.
Can you control find in the chat?
I don't know. Can you?
Oh, it was a good... Oh, is it too far back? It's interesting that the priest who is trying to... Oh, okay. It's interesting that the priest who is trying to condition the prisoners in his own way, which is very, very true, and he's very, very overt about it, is the one to bring up how you can't have morality without free will.
Mm-hmm.
The priest does seem to be like the good guy, even though it is kind of implied that when Alex says he wants to talk to him, he's like, oh, yeah.
Oh, this is the part where we have sex.
Yeah, this is the part where you have sex with the priest, boy. No, what do you think about that? It's interesting that the priest who is trying to condition the prisoners in his own way is the one to bring up how you can't have morality without free will. Well, free will is like a very important theme in Christianity. And Burgess was a Roman Catholic.
Yeah, I mean, there's the argument to be made of, like, if you're behaving yourself for fear of going to hell, is that really some, like, you know...
Is that moral?
Is that moral? Is it some form? Is it you know, an obscure form of operant conditioning?
Well, I think somebody who is behaving morally that does not believe in a higher power and does not believe in God is actually being a lot more authentic than somebody who is being moral because they're afraid some bearded dude's up there like wiggling his finger at them saying, no, don't do that.
I think that's the real point here, too, is that maybe like Christians who not were just into free will, but also profess to be into like the trivium of like logic and grammar and rhetoric, like real critical thinking. But the problem is it seems like they're perfectly happy being given a working language that they don't have to think about.
Right.
So like when they say morality, that means something to them and it has goodness in it. But what it really is, as Matt just said,
coercion,
is obedience.
Right.
Right? So morality, and this is also...
Talk about your threats of force.
Yeah, I mean, they call themselves God-fearing people.
Yeah.
They
if you don't do everything I say, I will throw you into a lake of fire forever and ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's coercion.
By the way, I love you.
Yeah, so if you're resisting the consequences of, like, doing something bad, you know, I don't think that that's really morality. I think that maybe Jesus, who would be horrified with what Christianity is, I'm pretty sure, was kind of like more thinking that way when he was talking about the do unto others type of behavior. So, but there is, I thought the comment was interesting because there is a very heavy Christian influence in this film. Burgess was a man who actually, prior to writing this book, saw his wife was raped and had all kinds of health problems pretty much for the rest of her life after that.
Right.
That was one of the things that inspired him to write this book.
And what you attribute the priest to saying in the movie is what, not verbatim, but it's very close to the quote that Burgess said that you read earlier about, you know, free will and choice, and better to somebody choose evil than have no choice at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the priest, I mean, his whole raison d'etre is you know, pushing for morality as determined by the Bible, which is really, I mean, think about it. It's the only difference between the Ludovico technique and, you know, using the Bible as your standard for behavior and what's going to happen to you if you don't behave. It's just the consequences are more immediate in the Ludovico technique.
Yeah, but nowhere near as extreme because Ludovico is bad, but it's not, you know, burning in a big fiery lake of poo or whatever hell's supposed to be.
Right.
But yeah, there's the immediacy of it as opposed to the long-term, you know, someday you're going to burn in hell. But yeah, they're both basically coercion. It's not coming to the choice to be moral through just simple reasoning, whether you want to call it like game theory or rational self-interest or however you come to it. that seems to be a more authentic, honest way of coming about it than
Yeah.
basically just being threatened into it.
Right.
So, damn you, God, damn you.
Yeah, what a creep.
He is.
Well, but the priest is this interesting character. I think, especially in the scene that I played the clip from at the end there, after Alex is being shown off
Right.
by the state, is what he says seems to be like the most genuine reflection of what Burgess thinks.
Right, right.
But when we see him being more the authoritarian, look at the setting that he's in,
Right.
Where that's kind of like the role that he has to play there. So there was one more thing about the book. That
Well,
we didn't,
there's
go ahead.
also, I'm sorry, the one more thing about the priest, though. The thing, if you think about the priest in his position, like, of course he would be threatened by the existence of this technique, because if you can just give everybody a an injection and a few days of watching movies, and they'll behave themselves perfectly well for the rest of their lives.
He's out of a job.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what do we need the church for now?
Right.
People are going to behave now,
Yeah.
right? So, I think he was being a hypocrite there, because what they're doing is ultimately no different than what he has devoted his life to. And he's going to be, they're going to corner the market.
That would make sense because it's certainly a recurring theme in the movie, the hypocrisy of adults.
Mm-hmm.
There is an interesting, this is kind of like bringing us to the end of our notes on Kubrick. But one of the things that I mentioned to Joe before we ran out of time on the regular show was that there's a missing chapter.
Right.
There's a chapter that's in the British version of the book that wasn't in the American novel and consequently wasn't in Kubrick's version of the film, because I think the American novel is what he saw. In the last chapter, it's like this redemptive Alex kind of, I think he sees one of his former droogs who in the book version didn't become a cop, but is like somebody who's like gone on with life and maybe has a wife. And Alex just like reflects and says, I'm ready to be an adult, right?
Right.
I'm ready to be a grown-up
Yeah.
who doesn't, support violence anymore.
Mhm.
And that's how it ends. And that, as far as a book is concerned, completes Alex's story arc, right?
Right.
It comes to a conclusion. But the movie doesn't wrap things up so nice and neat, right?
No.
You have no idea. You're very confused about what's going to happen to Alex, right? Because we know he's back to his old self.
Right.
But he's sitting there with two broken legs and a broken arm. And just kind of like,
And some kind of a head cast.
yeah, having these ideations. But like, what's next? Why did they put him back this way? Why
Right.
didn't they just kill him and throw him in the river? Like, why would,
Yeah. Why would they,
Like-
actually, come to think of it? I don't know.
So what are they? And then it's very subtle. And I hope I'm not reading too much into this, but when he's talking about we're going to get you a good job, it stimulates you. And look at what happened to his two friends.
Right.
They
He's going to
became
be,
law enforcement. So
I'm sure he'll be law enforcement, too.
now, I think that what's important to recognize is not just does it leave things like in the open like that, but it ends kind of saying like this isn't a story about the character Alex.
Right.
Alex's story arc is not the point of this movie, right? There's a deeper message in this movie, and Alex is kind of like Alex is a character. Characters are secondary.
Right. Characters are there to serve the story. They're not what the story's about.
Yeah,
In Kubrick, and Kubrick's work, generally speaking.
and I think I said, or I might have said it's like 2 hours ago, that McDowell was interviewed, and basically Kubrick just said, "Yeah, go do stuff in front of the camera."
Yeah. Just go over there. I'll point the camera at you, and you do your thing.
But the interesting, the Singing in the Rain, I guess, came from Malcolm McDowell.
Right.
And this is our last note on Kubrick, and then we can go on to the other part of the show, is that they shot this scene and rehearsed this scene of this rape. Here's actually comfortable or that level of uneasy about that scene where like, yeah, this should just be a horrifying thing.
Right.
But like puts you into this position where it's like, well, wait, I'm kind of amused.
Yep.
So, I think the man is a genius, and I could have talked about him. Probably the reason why we're here is probably entirely my fault.
Really? You think so?
Yeah, I think no. I mean, the reason why we're at this point in the show, the reason
Right.
why we're this far behind is probably.
I think we all contributed to that, though. That's fine.
Do you think, like looking at George Lucas making Luke Skywalker, basically that was him, right? That was kind of George's representation of himself. Not that he grew up on a moisture farm on Tatooine or anything like that, but that was kind of like George Lucas was inserting himself into the story. He kind of saw himself as a character. Do you think Kubrick had anything to do with that with Alex?
Wait a minute. Why do you think that about George Lucas? I'm curious.
Well, he named him Luke Skywalker. Isn't that kind of a clue right there?
I think George Lucas probably said, "I need a good guy. A good guy should wear white."
See, now you're looking back through the reflecting glass of the 3 prequels. You can't.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right,
but
you're
you know
right.
what? It's entirely possible he was just as much of a hack in 1976 as he was in 1999.
And he just had less people in awe of him.
Yeah, he had
so
less-
actually listened to.
He had to.
constructive
Yeah, he
criticism,
didn't fund the first trilogy with his own money like he did with the second one.
so he was a little bit more accountable, a little bit more. Yeah, I think definitely that was one of the.
He didn't have Rick
George Lucas.
McCallum standing around going, "Wow, George, that's brilliant. That's a great idea." And everybody's looking at each other like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, it seemed like he wasn't very interested. I mean, it wasn't a very character-driven story. Like he wasn't a character director either. Like not for the same reasons that Kubrick wasn't. And clearly, he's influenced by Kubrick, as was Spielberg and maybe Scorsese and
Sure.
like all those other New York guys, De Palma. But go ahead, Matt.
Do we know if I know nothing about Kubrick's life? Did he ever serve in the military? Was he anything like that?
He was a pilot. I don't know very much. He was born in New York, lived in New York most of his life, lived in England for a while, had a wife. There's not that he was very, very reclusive, and nobody really knows that much about it. But there is some evidence that he kind of, like if you look at a movie like Eyes Wide Shut, right, that he did mix it up with those kinds of people.
Yeah, or Full Metal Jacket. That's kind of what I was thinking about. Is how does somebody make a movie that good when? Was it a book first? I don't even know. Was it an adaptation of a book?
I can find out all that. And now we're in this more relaxed format, so we don't have to be like, oh my goodness, dead air. We can just do a Google search right in the middle of the show. What do people think of that?
I think that's a great idea.
So,
yeah.
Yep. I
Stanley
think like
Kubrick.
we actually covered a lot about him. Many of his films broke new ground in cinematography. 2001: Space Odyssey, Barry Lyndon, The Shining.
How much of a hand did you say he had in Spartacus? He took it over halfway through?
He took it over, I think, in the early stage. But the thing was, like, it was a studio picture, right, and had a fixed budget, and somebody else wrote it, and he couldn't sit there with a typewriter and change the screenplay.
Right.
So he, had that, like I said, a real sensitivity to not being in charge of something,
Right.
to not being autonomous. So, I think he has a certain amount of sympathy even for like a character like Alex, even though it was an interesting comment that you had when we were watching it the other night. You said, this movie is like Yay State.
Partway through, I still felt like that. By the end of it, I no longer did. But I was feeling the impression that everything he did in the all the horrible things he did in the first act was setting up the audience to think that the Ludovico treatment was a fair outcome for him. More than fair, actually. That's what it felt like at the time. But by the end of the movie, I didn't feel that way anymore.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, everybody, this is the end of the movie. Alex is defenseless. He's beaten up by his thug former friends who are now cops. He is taken out in the woods and left pretty much for dead. In the rain, he crawls to a house, hopefully to get some help. It's the same house, the same man whose wife he raped at the beginning of the film.
And the man is in a wheelchair because he have the injury sustained during that home invasion.
Right. The man is a political dissident, right, who is very much against these new crime and punishment fighting techniques that the government is using. He uses words in a phone call like authoritarianism and liberty.
He talks about how the people will give up liberty for more safety.
Yes, he actually says that. I remember we were watching it. I said, "Holy shit!"
Yeah,
right?
he said that. Wow.
Yeah, something that totally passed without my even noticing the last time I had seen the movie. So he basically arranges, once he finds out that Alex is the man who raped his wife and basically destroyed his life.
Mm-hmm.
He basically sets him up to commit suicide.
Well, I think he was planning to do that anyway.
Yeah.
I think the difference, and after he found out that Alex was the man that did that to him, that the difference is that he enjoyed it, knowing that Alex deserved whatever, in his worldview. So,
as a political dissident in an anti-authoritarian movie, he's not the protagonist.
No.
And what we see is...
Well, no, he just wants to take advantage of this to push his own political agenda. So it would just be a different authoritarian.
Like I read, right?
Yeah.
At the beginning of the... So you see two groups of old people using a young person to advance their agenda.
Exactly.
Right? And neither one of them care if his mind is destroyed or if he dies. Right?
Nope.
So, and that was the first scene we played where Mr. Deltoid says, "Don't fuck this up for me, Alex." Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is my ass on the line. And he
Right.
says, "Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, sir, as an unmuddied lake." This is the... Go ahead.
Yeah, they also... we also talked about earlier about him being set up to be a sacrificial lamb. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's exactly what the author wanted to do to him. Not Burgess, the author, but the writer character in the movie. He wanted to sacrifice Alex to push his own political agenda. Look, the Ludovico technique pushed this young boy to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
How terrible. He was literally a sacrificial lamb to that guy. But even before he knew that was the guy who, raped his wife, etc.
So he gets that sense through these different stages that, I'm being used, or you think you're going to use me.
Right.
Right. You think that, but feels like he can game it. I think at the end of the movie, he realizes that he's right. So we're going to play this last clip where after Alex survives his suicide attempt, the Secretary of the Interior, who set this whole thing up, put him in the Ludovico treatment to begin with, comes to see him in the hospital. And this is the cover your ass interaction that they have with one another.
I've kept in constant touch with the hospital, of course, and now I've come down to see you personally, to see how you're getting along.
I've suffered the tortures of the damned, sir. Tortures of the damned.
Yes, I can.
Now, did you notice the look on his face when he said that in the movie? "I've suffered the tortures of the damned." Not something that somebody usually says with a shit-eating grin on their face.
Yeah, but he was enjoying himself immensely.
I appreciate that you have had an extremely Oh, look, let me help you with that, shall I?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I can tell you with all sincerity that I and the government of which I'm a member are deeply sorry about this, my boy. Deeply sorry. We tried to help you. We followed recommendations which were made to us that turned out to be wrong. An inquiry will place the responsibility where it belongs. We want you to regard us as friends. We've put you right. You're getting the best of treatment. We never wished you harm. But there are some who did, and do. And I think you know who those are. There are certain people who wanted to use you for political ends. They would have been glad to have you dead, for they thought they could then blame it all on the government. There is also a certain man, a writer of subversive literature, who has been howling for your blood. He's been mad with desire to stick a knife into you. But you're safe from him now. We put him away. He found out that you had done wrong to him. At least he believed you had done wrong. He formed this idea in his head that you had been responsible for the death of someone near and dear to him. He was a menace. We put him away for his own protection, and also for yours.
Where is he now, sir?
We put him away where he can do you no harm. You see, we are looking after your interests. We are interested in you. And when you leave here, you will have no worries. We shall see to everything. A good job on a good salary.
What job and how much?
You must have an interesting job at a salary which you would regard as adequate. Not only for the job that you're going to do, and in compensation for what you believe you have suffered, but also because you are helping us.
Helping you, sir.
We always help our friends, don't we? It is no secret that this government has lost a lot of popularity because of you, my boy. There are some who think that at the next election we shall be out. The press has chosen to take a very unfavorable view of what we tried to do. But public opinion has a way of changing, and you, Alex, if I may call you Alex.
Certainly, sir. What do they call you at home?
My name is Frederick. As I was saying, Alex, you can be instrumental in changing the public's verdict. Do you understand, Alex? Do I make myself clear?
As an unmuddied lake, Fred. As clear as an azure sky of deepest summer. You can rely on me, Fred.
Good. Good boy.
Exactly what he said to Mr. Deltoid.
Yeah.
The same clear as, and then followed up with "you can rely on me."
Yeah.
And I love the language that guy used throughout that entire tirade. Was like he said stuff like, and also to compensate you for the whatever damages you feel you've suffered, or whatever pain you feel you've been caused. Like, as if he's saying, he seems like he's saying, like, whatever pain you feel, we don't actually care about that. We just want to be seen to be doing something about it.
Yeah.
And that's what it's, that's what it's, he talks very disparagingly of the people who want to use you for their own political ends, and then he spends the next 5 minutes explaining how he's going to use him for his own political ends.
Yeah,
Not even in any kind of obfuscated way. He just comes right out and says it. This is what we need politically, and this is how you're going to help us do it.
Well, it's the same. I mean, it's not much more complicated than what the state does or what politicians do today.
Right.
They say, well, it's us versus them, and we both use the same tactics, right? But we're your friends, and they want to hurt you.
Right.
Right? That's the war on terror, essentially.
Yeah.
So this movie, very prophetic, but also like a real, I think, reflection of the time in which it was made.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I think that's something we should. How long do you want to go?
It doesn't matter.
Really?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. So the title of this show was "The War on a Clockwork Orange," and that was a pretty in-depth look, I think, at this film.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that I felt was important to examine, and this will obviously go much, much faster, is the context of Britain in that time.
Right.
So I just pulled something from one of the government history websites, and I thought this was a nice and clean little synopsis. Immediately after the end of World War II, Britain underwent enormous social change. The country was bankrupt after the war. The wartime Prime Minister Churchill was voted out, and a new Labour government nationalized many industries: electricity, gas, water, health. Britain took a long time to recover from the cost of the war. After an abortive fling at being a world power, Britain began to dismantle her empire. Harold Macmillan's Wind of Change. It was this change that caused Dean Acheson, the former U.S. Secretary of State, to remark, "Britain has lost an empire, but not yet found a role." So that's like really kind of a run home with your tail between your legs as a society that I think for centuries had been very proud, in addition to being extraordinarily violent,
Right.
for hundreds of years, with their red coats and their boats, But also, there is this, I think, probably a real desire for the older generation to clutch on to the way things were.
Right.
And it must have been, I can't really imagine it. Like, they spend all this time supposedly fighting collectivism and socialism in Central Europe in the Second World War.
Right.
And
then immediately set about collectivizing, nationalizing everything.
Yeah, we should try that here. How bad could it be?
Yeah, and it turned out great for the Germans.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
So,
Except they would have said that in a British accent. So
They don't talk like this?
No.
I don't know why that's my impression for everyone stupid.
Yes.
Was that Bane?
No, that wasn't. No, it was the creepy counselor dude from the. Movie.
Yeah.
I was doing Bane. That was Bane.
When
did you notice
City is ashes,
Bane
then you have my permission
and
to
a bad
die.
Sean Connery impersonation? The same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah. That's,
Bane is like Sean Connery plus Goldmember from the Austin Powers movie.
Oh.
you see here, Batman.
I love gold. The smell of it. The
Tight
taste.
like a tiger.
The texture.
I love gold.
That's Sean Connery.
I lost my genitals in an unfortunate smelting accident.
That's just Sean Connery reading the screenplay.
Yes.
Yeah, for Goldmember's parts. So in this time in Britain, so you have this generation that grows up, right? And they grow up in air raid shelters.
Right.
And probably mostly traumatized.
Or out in the country.
Yeah. And it's a sick society.
Would
right?
you like a cigarette and a flapjack?
Smoking a pancake.
A smoke and a pancake?
Bong and a
Guys.
blitz.
A bong? A pipe and a crepe? Sorry.
You're right. Bomb shelters.
Bomb shelters.
Well, no, I mean, you think about...
Or they either grew up in air raid shelters or they shipped all the children off to live in big manor houses in the country where they had magical wardrobes.
Yeah. So the adult... Well, that's... And probably more of the former, right?
What, magical wardrobes?
No, wasn't that the latter?
Oh, wait. Oh, air raid shelters was the former.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that.
Probably more the former than... And then... So you have the people who are adults in that society are traumatized.
Oh, yeah.
Their childhood experiences, but they're the parents or the people becoming parents. And in what is a very, very deeply sick society, like culturally, psychologically, say historically and economically at this point, the liberalization movement of the 60s, just like it happened here, starts there, right? So people are getting more freedom, but it's like, the same thing that would happen if you controlled and made people feel lesser than and, put people in a position where they couldn't make their own decisions, and then they just said, oh, you're free. Like the question of what if you could push a button and government was gone tomorrow? I'm sure I'd be dead in a week, right? I'm sure some maniac would just kill me with a chainsaw.
Sure.
I'm not, I might sound like a statist for saying that, but we do not live in a world psychologically equipped.
No, I think you're absolutely right. We couldn't, that would not be the way I would prefer to do it.
Right.
People are so, raised in and dependent on the system as it stands. They have to be weaned off of it. We can't just go cold turkey overnight.
Right. So as these old shackles of the British, the
British Empire
formality,
right,
and cultural norms is kind of being done away with, and people can be more free. You can kind of see what's really there as people become more expressive. And I think it might have been a little different than what happened here, but it's the same idea. They had hippies there and all of that.
They did.
And, of course, you have all the people that you mentioned that actually were alive during World War II, the ones that were in air raid shelters, that kind of thing. Very conservative people. I mean, they're coming off of, the Victorian era, plus they're British, so they naturally just have sticks genetically up their asses. They're very conservative people.
Yeah.
They're British. And suddenly you start having all these, punks, hippies, Beatles, that kind of thing showing up. And, I mean, from any generation looking at the youth, you're going to get a little bit scared. I mean, the youth of America scare the crap out of me. I don't understand them. But you have this going on, and as they look at this scary thing, and they look at, violence and sex, promiscuity, that kind of thing happening, they're going to look for something to blame. Along comes the movie A Clockwork Orange, which seems to, exemplify or put in stark light all their fears of the youth, coming to my house and raping my wife and putting me in a wheelchair and that kind of thing. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the movie was so controversial. The movie got an X rating in America. Kubrick received so much. I think it was around for maybe about 10 months before he pulled it, or not even that long.
It might have been, something in that ballpark.
Where he got so much outcry against it that he actually pulled it from theaters.
Right.
And I mean, at the same time that movie came out, 1971, there were other movies that were equally as violent, if not more so. I mean, Dirty Harry came out in 1971. Dirty Harry. I mean, that movie had violence for violence sake, for shit's sake.
Yeah.
It was cool. Clint Eastwood's cool, but it wasn't. I mean, the violence in A Clockwork Orange was integral to the story. I mean, that was
Right.
part
There was a part of the point.
yeah.
Well, it seems like there was a window in time there where a bunch of these movies that push limits that no one had pushed before could be made at that time. So you have like The Graduate, right. Where guys having sex with somebody's mom.
Mm-hmm.
The Easy Rider, Midnight Cowboy, The Wild Bunch, Last Tango in Paris.
Right.
They're putting butter in butts in that movie. I don't know if you've seen that. Guy likes butter in his butt or something. It's a very sexually explicit kind of movie. Even The Godfather
Yeah.
was like a really super violent movie, like a horse's head in a bed.
Right. That's
that one?
pretty
Is
messed
that in
up.
one?
That was in
Yeah,
one.
that was in one.
Yeah, and you look at it too. If you're gonna protest about violence, if it really was about violence in movies, you would go after a movie like Dirty Harry, where we're supposed to cheer for all the violence. In Clockwork Orange, you're supposed to be like, off put at the very least by the violence on display. But in a movie like Dirty Harry, you're supposed to cheer for this guy. Like, yeah, those guys fucking deserve it.
Well, geez, Dirty Harry's nothing compared to the character in the movie that won Best Picture prior to that, George Patton.
Right.
So the Best Picture for the Academy Awards in 1970 is Patton, right?
Right.
Where, what did we figure out in Clockwork Orange? 2 people died? Maybe, both as pretty much not the characters. The villain, Alex, it wasn't his intention to kill either one of them. Now, I'm not defending Alex, of course.
No.
But you do not see one person die in that movie.
No.
And you also pointed out when we were watching it the other night that almost all of the violence is in like the first 25 to 30 minutes.
Yep.
And then there's almost no violence in the film after that.
Yeah, once he goes to jail, the only other violence we see is when he gets beat up by his 2 friends, who are now cops, and arguably whatever goes on in the author's house. But that's not even, physical violence. It's psychological violence that has a physical effect on him.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, you don't see anybody get beaten up apart from, those 3 victims. And that's enough, really.
So what you said is that the movie basically became a lightning rod, right?
Yeah, very much so.
And before that, in the article that we all read called The Clockwork Controversy, I'll link to that in the show notes, it was saying like this permissiveness, the conservatives that Matt was saying most of the people in the culture were at that time, who didn't like this, like youth having a voice.
Yeah.
Like, aren't the youth supposed to be invisible
Yeah.
in our proper culture? The first thing they did was blame communism, right?
Well, they
'Cause if
had
you
Russian words in the movie, so.
Well, no, I mean, like, even before, like, what we're talking, like, into the 50s
Oh,
and
yeah,
60s,
yeah.
right? Like, if you can't blame the kids, you got to find some foreigners to pin it on.
Right.
So
communism.
The permissiveness in that culture, what they saw as moving away from their traditions, was first blamed on communists.
Right.
It's like today, don't they? I just saw, like, some O'Reilly Fox News thing where he's talking about a war on Christmas.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it's time for the, once you hit December, as soon as Thanksgiving is over, it's time to start railing against the non-existent war on Christmas.
Yeah. So I think that's, I mean, boy.
I've never seen a damn thing that suggests to me that there is a war on Christmas, but the conservatives are always like, oh, we're going to get the war on Christmas. All I see people complaining on their Facebook posts about how they're not allowed to say Merry Christmas anymore, but I've never had anyone tell me I wasn't allowed to say Merry Christmas. It's like a thing of its own. Like the war on Christmas exists completely independent of the fact that there is no war on Christmas.
Yeah.
It's just a way for religious people to complain about how they're being persecuted.
But also maybe as an outlet for exactly the same thing that we're talking about here. Now, I'm not going to say maybe. I'm going to say definitely. It's an outlet for that steady and maybe even increasing uneasiness about being a conservative-minded person in a world that's changing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it just comes up as like these secular, progressive, Muslim Hispanics or whatever who are, overrunning the country and stealing our culture, whatever they say. Right?
And they're communazis.
But this discomfort with still having to be alive in a world that's not the comfortable world that you grew up in.
Right.
So maybe that just manifests as a war on Christmas.
Well, I think I mean, we were talking. I think we briefly touched upon the word scapegoat. I mean, that's what most people do is they look for the comfortable lie rather than the uncomfortable truth. So they see their own children misbehaving. They see rap music. They don't understand it. My parents can't figure out how to program a friggin' VCR. You're uncomfortable. You're a little bit scared. Technology and society is kind of spinning away from what you consider to be traditional or how it was back in your day. So you start casting about for something to explain it. You look for a scapegoat, and the hard answer, the truthful answer might be maybe you didn't raise your kids right, maybe you shouldn't have worked so much, maybe you should have hugged your children more. There's a lot of answers that are internal that most people are going to shy away from. They're going to go for the easy answer. So it's Ozzy Osbourne,
it's Dungeons and Dragons,
yeah,
it's video games.
Grand Theft Auto is taking my children away. Well, that's BS.
Or why my kid does nothing but play video games. All he does is sit in his room and play video games. Well, kids aren't allowed out of the house unsupervised anymore. What are they supposed to do?
Yeah, plus if you take a kid that spends 20 or 30 hours a week reading Lord of the Rings, that's good, that's productive. If you get the same kid playing Skyrim for 20, 30 hours a week, pretty much the exact same fantasy environment,
right?
Suddenly that's bad. Oh, that's bad. That's violent.
That was one of the things that was so appealing to me about this topic, is that to go back this far in the past to a distant place and see exactly the same thing that you're talking about, because it's a real recurring theme on this show.
Right.
I've done entire series of shows with that theme in it. Don't look at the real problem. What did you say? A comfortable lie is better than
an uncomfortable truth.
Uncomfortable truth.
Right.
And I think maybe some of us, certainly me, I can speak from experience. I understand this in my personal life. Like sometimes it's easier to, not look at the facts of reality.
Sure.
If they're uncomfortable. But that is certainly the mode of functioning in the adult world.
Yeah, very much so. I mean,
it's just a bunch of old people sitting around going, "What's wrong with these kids today?" and putting forth their theories.
Well, I mean, if you look at the thing that a lot of libertarians constantly complain about, they're talking about how the terrorists don't want to kill us because of Britney Spears and Coke. That's the comfortable lie.
Right.
The comfortable lie is that we're America, we're free, therefore they hate us. The uncomfortable truth is that, we're over there embargoing and killing and, destroying brown people.
It's funny because I just saw they just finally released the trailer for the Red Dawn remake.
I saw that movie. I'll tell you about it. Keep going. Sorry.
The remake you saw?
Yeah.
Really? Because I'm kind of interested in seeing it because I did enjoy the original. It was the commies and it was 1985. But it's just funny that in a movie like Red Dawn, which a lot of people who are yay America, think, yeah, Red Dawn, fight back, take America back. And the movie is about a bunch of kids whose country gets invaded and they become terrorists overnight. That is exactly what happens in these movies. These kids, their homeland gets invaded and they immediately turn around and become terrorists.
Right, funny story about the remake. They wrote, scripted, and acted with China being the bad guy.
Right, and then they changed it to North Korea.
Yeah,
right?
and they actually digitally altered the uniforms to look like North Korea just because they didn't want to piss off China because they were planning on selling this movie to their biggest markets, and China's a pretty damn big market for movies like this. So they changed that. Another thing about the movie is you're right. I mean, Red Dawn, the original, it was really, really good. I mean, what's his name? Swayze, Jed. What's the difference? Somebody asked. Somebody yells, because we live here. This is our home. They're basically a bunch of kids defending their home from an invasion.
Right.
They don't get all hoo-wah, let's do this for America. It's more like, let's do this for mom and pop and the people sitting around me around the campfire.
Right.
Whereas the new movie, they didn't really touch on that quite the same. And they had this end montage scene where everybody's fighting back, and they actually have one dude grab a big American flag and run with it in slow motion.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, he's ruined everything about that was good about
it. It was not as good as the first. I think they should not have made it.
See, I was kind of excited about some of the actors I saw that were in it, like Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Chris Hemsworth.
Another good thing about the original Red Dawn is you didn't know that much about the characters. Nobody really talked that much. The only one that actually had any extended lines was what's his name, Colonel, the pilot dude.
Yeah, Powers Booth. Right.
Yeah, he was the only one that actually spoke at any length of time, unless maybe you consider the bad guys occasionally talking with some subtitles.
Right.
In this movie, it was just jibber jabber. It was exposition. They just they basically Hollywooded up the whole awesomeness that was the original Red Dawn. Yeah.
So, but the point of that is that it's easier to say they hate us for our freedom than to do any self-examination.
Yeah, I think when people that we know, people that are in the liberty community, when they watch something like that, they're going to get something completely different out of it. They're going to get out of it what I think the most important message is if you invade a country, you're going to get a ration of shit.
You're going to meet some friggin' resistance.
Whereas I think, sadly, most of the people watching the movie are going to get, hoo-ah, go team, go Wolverines, go America.
Yeah, when they invade America and we become terrorists to overthrow the occupying force, that's okay because it's America.
It'd be called Patriots.
Because the U.S. of A. is worth defending, unlike these other shithole countries that we invade.
I mean, making the simple, logical step of comparing that situation in that movie to maybe like just random Afghani villagers that are getting killed left and right and decide to fight against their oppressors and their invaders. There's the mental disconnect that so many people seem to have. They can't make that step. Like, that would shake the very foundations of their core that America's the best.
Yeah.
The newsroom. Never mind. We're getting off topic.
Well, it was Britain. I mean, back on topic, it was Britain before that.
Yeah.
You know, Britain was the center of the world. The sun never sets on the British Empire.
That's true.
And all of that kind of collapsing
overnight.
There's going to be a lot of resentment in society from people who remember life before the war.
Right.
Now, Britain technically was on the winning side of the war, but in a destroyed country in every way.
And they basically became kind of like the bitch boy of the United States.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if we as a country, not to use like collectivist terms or anything, but I wonder if we should actually study that a little bit, because maybe we see America heading that way. Like, people are going to look back on America like they're looking back on Britain now and saying, hey, they used to be on top of the world, but now they're China's bitch boy or something like that.
Yeah, like, well, I think that's very possible because of the United Kingdom. They got to where they are by being in close enough proximity to Germany that Germany was constantly sending bombers to blow up their stuff, which leads to a very humorous quote from John Lennon in the 60s. He was talking about, when they used to tour Germany a lot. And he's like, I love flying on Lufthansa. All the pilots know how to find London. But, their country was constantly getting bombed, and they were in World War II for a number of years before the U.S. decided to get involved. Right? So they were already slugging it out with the Germans and having a really difficult time of it for a good long while. And they were, they were getting drained. And we show, the United States shows up towards the end, like, we're here.
Yeah, I mean,
and the British are like, where the hell have you been?
Well, they had to find a way into the war.
Yeah, and they did.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't find it so much as manufacture it, but
well, there's
some. I agree that there's some controversy over that. But just like with the moon landing, I'm going to assume that the conspiracy theory is probably true.
Even if it's not, there was a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. that day who went, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Back to Kubrick.
So, the war on A Clockwork Orange.
So after A Clockwork Orange came out, I was reading a little bit about the social impact that it had on England, and for years afterwards, they would see in courts how they actually had a phrase. It's a Clockwork Orange case, where somebody would come into, or they called it a Clockwork Orange defense. Somebody would come into court and say, "Oh, Your Honor, sorry, this child was warped by watching this movie," and they actually can see in the statistics that they got lighter sentences. They were let off a lot easier because, they were, they warped their fragile little mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, it was used much the same way that, like the Ozzy Osbourne, what was it called? The Suicide
Solution?
Yeah, Suicide Solution, that one. There's been a lot of them recently. I mean, Marilyn Manson and Columbine was the most
Well,
I have a couple
biggest one.
Quotes from, like, opinion shapers and decision makers in Britain at that time. Actually took them from that article. First one is Maurice Edelman, the Labour MP for Coventry West and co-chairman of the All-Party Film Committee, who got together, I think, 50 members of parliaments and peers to go see the movie and evaluate what its impact on society might be. He said, the film stimulates for 2.5 hours an appetite for sadistic violence with the instantaneous communication which the visual arts uniquely offer. I believe when A Clockwork Orange is generally released, it will lead to a clockwork cult which will magnify teenage violence.
I'm really... I'm stunned. Just stunned that anybody could watch that movie and go and walk away from it thinking, man, that violence sure looked like fun. I want to try that. But somebody who would walk away from that movie thinking that is crazy.
Okay, but then there is a debate there because the violence in that movie does, I hate to say it, it does have an element of fun in it. It's cartoon violence. The blood isn't even the right color. So it's like, the blood looks like ragu tomato sauce.
I don't know, man. Like, one of the reasons that, like, I'm not a huge fan of, I'm like an extra not a huge fan of this movie. So, like, my brother and his friends used to watch it, like, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And they only watched the first act. They stopped after that. Because the stuff they wanted to see was the humorous violence. But, I don't know, when I was a kid, like, it sickened me.
Right.
Even, like, the singing and dancing, yeah, but then as soon as he starts kicking that guy in the torso, like, that's when I checked out. It made me sick to watch it. But maybe that's because I'm, sort of sensitive about stuff like that.
Yeah, okay. I understand.
So it just blows my mind that somebody could watch that movie and go, wow, okay. I could see where that would make you excited for violence.
Well, I think that's the extra disturbing thing about it, is it is making you walk that line of, like, I'm disturbed, I'm amused, I'm disturbed, I'm amused.
Yes.
Like the scene where the other rival gang is about to rape that girl in the old casino or the old theater. They're on stage. And, like, the violence that ensues after that is so Looney Tunes ridiculous. You see, like, a guy go through a window upside down.
Yeah, it's basically like a big dust cloud with, like, occasional hands and feet sticking out.
Plus, they had the old school, like, stuntman pratfalls and the, like, it looked like a Western cowboy fight. It was kind of cool.
So I think somebody could say that it does, for some people, violence would be fun. But the most important thing that's always overlooked, whether we're talking about a Clockwork Orange or Marilyn Manson or Grand Theft Auto or whatever, is that a society filled with young people who need such little urging to go over that line.
Right.
That's a sign right there that the problems in your culture, in your society, with your education and raising of children goes way, way deeper than just one movie.
Yeah, they also never really, they ever nearly show you the full picture either. Like, if, a kid plays Grand Theft Auto and then decides to go on a joyride through the city, ignoring red lights and picking up hookers and beating them up, whatever. This is all things you can do in Grand Theft Auto. But they'll talk about the one kid who played that game for 12 hours and then went out on a shooting spree. They don't talk about the 150,000 other kids who played that game for 10 hours a day for a month and then never did a violent thing in their lives.
No.
They don't talk about those people. They don't talk about what a statistical anomaly these people are who may have actually been driven to violence by a video game.
Now, we mentioned terrorism a few minutes ago, so imagine if the same standard was applied to religion. And this was a point that Burgess actually brought up. He said, why don't you ban the Bible? It has all kinds of violence in it.
That's true.
So, but religion is considered, it's dealt with in the opposite way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, Christian violence, neo-Nazism, or whatever, uses Christianity or Islam or some other religion as a justification for violence is clearly illustrated to be the minority.
Right.
But these little examples that you're talking about with, like, video games or music or some other movie is magnified. And this is what Males talks about too. It's like the entire perception, the entire society's perception about youth is made by magnifying a very, very few isolated examples.
Right. For example, like Dungeons and Dragons, right? What have we all, I mean, if you were around in the 80s, like Dungeons and Dragons was like the worst thing that ever happened, ever.
Yeah, it'll make you want to kill your parents.
It'll make you want to worship the devil and
there was
kill
actually
your parents and then go home, get stoned, and shoot yourself in the head.
There was a Tom Hanks movie before he was Tom Hanks.
I have it on DVD.
Yeah,
it was a TV movie, Mazes and Monsters. It was called. It was based on a true story.
It was him and that kid from Meatballs.
Yes. Chris Mc something. Anyways,
Makepeace.
Chris Makepeace. That was his name.
Damn,
right.
We're good.
So anyway, this whole thing, it was based on, there was this huge deal. And for it's still to this day, there are people who were like, Dungeons and Dragons, doesn't that make you worship Satan? Because there was one kid who was almost certainly schizophrenic to begin with, started playing Dungeons and Dragons, got a little too into it, then his Dungeons and Dragons character got killed, and he went crazy and killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that one kid who played Dungeons and Dragons and then killed himself, Dungeons and Dragons is a game that makes you kill yourself. Because his mother needed to blame someone for her son's suicide, so she, set on Dungeons and Dragons and made this huge national headline out of it for
Because
years.
it kept her from actually like having to look in the mirror.
It was a cover-up.
Her own parenting skills.
It was
the same thing for a parent that it is for society. It's a cover-up for the real problems.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, just to focus specifically on Clockwork Orange, which I think is interesting, is that the other cover-up that seemed to be going on with all of this media hysteria and political hysteria directed at youth was that the focus on the violence in the first third of the film seemed to be a cover-up or a distraction from the real message and meaning of the film and the warnings of the film. That dealt with things that already exist at that time. Like B.F. Skinner was a guy. Watson was a guy. William Wundt was a guy alive at that time. They had already had an impact.
Right. An aversion therapy where they use a drug that makes you extremely nauseous while they show you pictures of the thing that they want you to stay away from was already happening. Psychiatrists were already doing it. It was one of the ways they were trying to cure homosexuality in the early 60s.
They had that on American Horror Story.
They did do that in American Horror Story. But they were real, it was a real technique that people were using.
Yeah, there was a couple other, this kind of goes back to, is the film prophetic or is it just reflecting things that are already existing in that time? Now, one way that I think it definitely was prophetic is that Alex gets punished so harshly, right? Or so unfortunately, or so much energy is directed into him instead of looking at a broader problem, right? So he's kind of like this product of his time in an environment, assuming the time was modern-day Britain and the science fiction Clockwork Orange was just a funhouse mirror that was put on the society that really exists. But all of those things that happened to Alex, so was the case with the film.
That's true.
The film, in real life, has exactly the same role in British society that Alex is like this political football in the movie.
Interesting.
Right? But the other thing is that drugging for obedience, it's interesting to think about what Kubrick could have known, right? He could have known the maybe at that point a somewhat scattered history of psychological experimentation or drug-induced compliance. Maybe that has something to do why there's this heavy Nazi presence and symbolism in the movie, because it was very well known, especially in Britain, by the 60s, what the Nazis had done. But even in Britain, there was another quote from that article. There was a guy named Peter Thompson who was a religious figure and had led crusades, for lack of a better word, against other movies. One was called The Devils, a similar kind of violent movie of the time.
Yeah.
But saw Clockwork Orange after he had been a patient in a British psychiatric hospital in the the late 60s, and he said, to someone who has committed violent acts and who has been mentally ill, this film has a lot to say about society. It is my honest opinion that this is the best film I have ever seen. I felt like I was reliving my own experiences. In Broadmoor, a psychiatric hospital, they have drugs that bring you out in rashes. Alex's aversion therapy seems to me to be the exact equivalent of 900 milligrams of Largatil, which is Largatil is like an antipsychotic, basically like Thorazine. So now we have like MK Ultra, which was a thing that was going on at that time, which is CIA experiments using drugs, using LSD.
Yeah, where they hired prostitutes to give their Johns LSD and then watched from a secret room to watch the guys freak out.
Yeah, but the scope of MK Ultra wasn't known at that time. Like the reason why people know about MK Ultra was, I think, pretty much the church committee hearings. It was like a Senate investigation or a House investigation, but that wasn't until the mid 70s that they found out about that. So what Kubrick could have known is interesting, and there's like a real mystique around him. Like, how was he involved with these people? The whole NASA connection, getting a lens for Barry Lyndon from NASA. Supposedly, only one of them in the world existed. Like, did he know things? And there's people who have that yay state interpretation of Clockwork Orange that, oh, this film is programming and it's supposed to romanticize being drugged into compliance in an authoritarian state.
I don't know how anybody could walk away from the film by the end of it with that. I mean, halfway through, I was kind of feeling like that's what it was doing, but by the end of it, I was like, oh, no way. How does that romanticize being drugged for obedience? He starts vomiting as soon as something bad happens to him.
But it's a happy ending.
Because he's cured of his
so
drug
but
for obedience?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I know this
I
was
don't
a
know.
theory that Alex Jones put forward, that Kubrick was like, this agent of this propagandist agent of the NWO or whatever. But
Of the Illuminati.
But no, but I mean that is a real concern, that propaganda is used in films, like in Hollywood.
Oh,
Hollywood is
sure.
a dark and dirty place.
Oh, God. Ugh.
And
Filthy.
I encourage people to do a couple Google searches on a comedian named Dave Chappelle, right?
Oh,
who,
my gosh.
Who is one person who just poked his head out a little bit and said, shit's fucked up here. You know,
Yeah.
and he was doing Inside
And
the
he
Actors
was never
Studio.
heard from again.
Yeah, he was doing Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton. And he says, I know Martin Lawrence. The thing you know about Martin Lawrence is that his career ended by him standing on a car, waving a gun around, saying they're trying to kill me.
Right.
This was one of the most together, strongest people that I ever met in my life. What drives somebody to that?
Right.
And I think, and he was very vague about it, but he says, I think that, shows us something about this business, And Chappelle's story was Chappelle walked away from $50 million and pretty much like the most popular cable comedy show.
Yeah. Ever, maybe.
Yeah, and just the trajectory of where that show was going at the time was like, it was unstoppable. It was an amazing show.
It was.
And left the country. So Hollywood is a dark and scary place, I believe.
Yeah.
And I believe it's also kind of like a...
Well, why are the newspapers, especially the tabloids, so full of stories of, Hollywood celebrities doing crazy shit? It's because they've all been driven crazy because they work and live in Hollywood.
Well, it's part of it. Plus, it's not exactly, we talked about this, I think, last week. It's not exactly an environment or a community that's really open to free thinking either.
No.
Plus everybody there is surrounded by people just telling them how smart and witty and charming they are. And that is bound to drive you a little bit insane.
Absolutely.
When there's no,
Look at George Lucas.
self-reflection.
As soon as he got a collection of yes men underneath him, he just went bonkers.
Oh, sure. It's like any intelligence agency where we all just hang out with each other, and then before we know it, we're doing some really weird things.
Yeah.
Like, let's see if we can kill this goat by looking at it.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. Yeah.
It just becomes a big circle jerk.
That was a good movie.
But
It was a good movie.
That's the thing that happens, though. Like, and I think once people start getting weird, or doing self-destructive things, they gravitate towards other people who normalize that behavior.
Right.
Now, I don't know, self-destructive might not be the word, but Hollywood is very insulated
Yeah.
and isolated, I think, from the rest of the world in many ways. So,
Well, also in Hollywood, I mean, even if you behaved poorly enough to get yourself blacklisted from Hollywood, it's not like if I lost my job, I don't know where my next meal is coming from. If you become an alcoholic in the real world, you probably get fired. If you have a hardcore drug problem that you can't control and you can't show up to work on time, you just get fired.
Whereas in Hollywood,
you go to the Betty Ford clinic
You get
for
ratings.
a couple months.
I mean, you get Charlie Sheen treatment.
If you can't handle your shit, then you're exhausted and you go somewhere, go to a spa for a little while.
Plus,
to
I think
relax.
the fact that it's such an insular environment, I think it's also much like academia. You have to behave a certain way, say the right things, otherwise you get blacklisted, you don't get published, whatever.
Yeah.
The people that like the whole environmental thing. If you didn't toe the line on the environmental thing, you basically got.
Or if you didn't
run
toe
out
the
of
line on
business.
Obama
Yeah.
or whatever.
Hollywood is very much like that, and unlike all these other institutions that we just mentioned, Hollywood is actually very, very influential with a lot of America. So you get movies like what was that John Cusack stuff blowing up, The End of the World.
Oh,
2012.
2012.
Yeah, 2012. I mean, that one. The whole point of it was, we've been bad to the environment, therefore the world's going to kill us.
the Mayans couldn't have known about the environment. Didn't even have pants.
It's true.
That's because they didn't need to have pants.
But whoa,
Because the climate was different.
Yeah, I mean, if you could get around without having to wear pants,
sure,
Sure.
makes
hey.
perfect sense.
where would you put your car?
But on this whole Hollywood thing, if there ever was one exception to the rule of the conformity of Hollywood, if there ever was one person who was incredibly well known and incredibly well respected, but he wasn't subsumed, and certainly there are other examples, but Kubrick really, really stayed out of that, right? And it was like he understood what the sacrifice would be.
Right.
And his movies, like the 12 movies that he made during his career, with the exception of Spartacus, which was a Hollywood movie,
Right.
are all so far removed from anything that ever came out of Hollywood.
Yes. That's true.
But, this show, it's interesting. If I just wanted to call it a war on a Clockwork Orange, it could have been 40 minutes.
Could have been.
How about that? How are we doing in the after show?
We had to build up to the war.
Yeah.
We couldn't just go right into it. It wouldn't have been as meaningful.
Well, what we've done so far will cut down to about 2 hours in a podcast, I think.
Do you have a new title for the show?
Cool beans.
No, I'm still gonna call it that. Maybe I'll do it in 2 parts and just do the first part as setup and the second part as. But any other thoughts on this? I'm trying to see if there's any other.
If there is one must-see Kubrick film for somebody who has not really seen any of them, what would you say it was?
If somebody had never seen any of them,
Yeah,
I would say do not start with 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Because that's something that you have to kind of work your way up to, and I think there needs to be an appreciation for him as a filmmaker too before you could sit through that movie. I would say I would think Clockwork Orange would be the place to start, especially if a person is a libertarian, because this is a film that would really, I think, especially today,
Yeah.
especially if they care about these, the treatment of youth in society,
Mm-hmm.
the way youth is used, and as what did males say, commodified.
Right.
This, I would think, is a film that would really resonate with a lot of people, and was one of the reasons why I wanted to devote a whole show to it.
I think it's interesting that most of the controversy it received was specifically for the violence that occurred in the first 25 minutes of the movie.
Right.
Everything else that we've talked about didn't really contribute to its controversialness when it came out. It was all about the violence and the rape,
It couldn't even be touched.
Yeah, all the other stuff.
Nobody-
the whole chemical control, the whole authoritarianism, none of that stuff actually made it controversial. That was all kind of like glossed over.
Well, I mean,
in
people
fear of
who
youth.
people who are protesting a film very rarely watch the entire film. I bet most of the people who are like, "Oh, this movie's just violence for violence's sake," probably walked out 30 minutes in at the most,
Maybe a
and
lot of
didn't even see the rest of it.
Sure, maybe a lot of the political and religious types that went to see it just to have this indignation about it. They could get whatever they needed, and geez, you can get whatever you need in the first 10 minutes, and
Right.
then leave. But the other thing too, and Matt makes a good point. If you say this movie is dangerous because of these reasons, well, shit, you just confessed. Right?
Right.
As that these are the real concerns about this movie. So those things are never even put on the table.
Right.
Right? There's never even a question of, like, self-examination is just like, no. Self-examination is, don't be unpatriotic, right? Or don't be a subversive, right? It's not even ever entertained. There's no discussion
Right.
of it. So that's a really good point. If you guys have any other thoughts, I'm going to just spend a minute here looking through the chat. Someone
Talking
says,
about scapegoats, right? Because remember that kid with the D&D and his mom blamed Dungeons and Dragons because he killed himself? The kid's name was Bink Pulling. That was his name, Bink Pulling. So parents had to blame his suicide on Dungeons and Dragons so they wouldn't have to admit that maybe, just maybe, your son killed himself because you named him Bink.
someone in the chat says, not only is it prophetic, but did anyone actually use that as a blue plan? Which a blueprint, I'm guessing, maybe somewhere they call it something somewhere else. I've always thought about that. Like with 1984, did it predict things, or did people read it and think, "Hey, that's pretty good"?
No, I think those things were actually happening in 1948 when Orwell wrote 1984.
Absolutely, sure. But there was also, I mean, some of the circles that some of these people travel. Like, there's a lot of speculation about Kubrick. Like when he made the movie Eyes Wide Shut, what was he mixed up in?
Right.
I've followed a lot of these leads, and it never really led me to anything incredibly concrete. Most of it ends with like the Shining Code type stuff,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, as far as how provable it is. And I'm certainly open to, more information on that. And there's some of these people like H.G. Wells. I mean, they were mixed up with people who were trying to plan the world,
Yeah.
H.G. Wells wrote a book, and I think he coined the phrase New World Order. It was the title of a book he wrote in the 40s. And then you have Huxley, You know, in
That
Brave
was
New
well
World.
before the 40s,
Right.
wasn't it?
So yeah.
Wells wrote around the turn of the century.
Brave.
I would
get a year on Brave New World.
Oh, Brave New
No,
World.
no. You're right. I was thinking of Wells Fargo.
Aldous Huxley.
New World Order. It's hard to type with one hand. New World Order. 1940. He wrote it.
What? He was still even alive
The
then?
New World Order is a book written by H.G. Wells, originally published in January 1940. Wells expressed the idea that a new world order should be formed to unite the nations of the world in order to bring peace and end war. It was republished in 2007.
I thought of him as being, he published his first book in 1899, so he was getting a little long in the tooth by the time he wrote this.
I like that expression.
Long in the tooth?
Mm.
You know where it comes from, right?
Does it have something to do with some kind of animal that's not a human?
Yes.
Shark?
Rodents.
Rodents. They get long in the tooth.
Their teeth never stop growing their entire lives. So the older they are, the bigger their teeth are. That's why they chew things so obsessively, so their teeth don't grow out of control.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Fun facts with Cory.
Humans get bigger teeth because their gums recede. So, flaws.
You know, the human ear does not stop growing throughout your lifespan.
Oh, yeah, that's why you see those old guys.
And their ears are like the size of their head.
Yeah.
That's
Tommy Lee Jones, he's got some big friggin' ears.
He does, and they're only getting bigger.
I know. Poor guy. Anyway, so Orson Welles was in favor of this overarching...
H.G. Wells.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know what Orson Welles might have been in favor of.
Oh, Orson Welles. I mean, there's stories about
Rosebud frozen peas.
Well, Orson Welles, this is another... let's not get real Alex Jonesy here, but Orson Welles did War of the Worlds, right? The radio...
the radio
Wells
show.
wrote
right.
it, and then
Right.
Orson Welles did this
the
thing on the
radio
radio.
show. And then George Powell directed the movie in the 50s.
Yeah, but they said that this was like a psychological conditioning thing to see how the public would react to a crisis like that.
But pretty badly.
Yeah. So
I don't know why they needed such a grand experiment to figure that out.
Well,
but I shouldn't even say that because I don't know anything about that, and there probably is no truth to that. So, but I mean, it is true that Wells, we do know that Wells had H.G. Wells had connections and espoused these ideas in writing.
Yes.
So there is a connection between entertainment media and a quest for greater control or planning the world for the interest of a very few. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking earlier, it was kind of a stray thought I had. I forgot exactly what we were talking about, but I just got on the topic in my head about nowadays, after we have E.T. and the remake of War of the Worlds and all these movies about aliens coming to Earth. What's that one? District 9. All these things. If aliens actually came and plopped down a spaceship in the middle of Central Park and walked out and waved at everybody, you wouldn't have the same kind of furor that you had with the whole War of the Worlds radio broadcast. Now everybody just not really shrug it off. Everybody be amazed, and rightfully so. But I think the public would be able to handle it a hell of a lot better.
Well, yeah, but War of the Worlds also, there was the fact that in that radio, it was the guy on the radio describing aliens coming and blowing stuff up.
Yeah, that was kind of
cool. If the aliens just landed in Central Park and introduced themselves or started hovering over the UN and came down and said, "Hi, we're from the planet Flaxcorb," that would be one thing. But if they just showed up with no explanations and started just blowing shit up, then people would, they would freak the hell out.
But I think through Hollywood and the direction it's taken, most people in the world have been desensitized to aliens coming to Earth, right? What if there's an agenda behind that? What if they're already here?
Now, people.
The fun part is if you look at the trends in aliens coming to Earth movies, showing you whoever's in power at the time will dictate what kind of movies get made. Late 70s, early 80s, there was a very alien-friendly regime in power. So you get Close
Starman.
Encounters, E.T., Starman, exactly. And then a few years later, the balance of power shifts,
Then you get
and then
Will
you
Smith
get
having to save the day.
exactly. Exactly.
But there are people. I think the point that you're making, and this is where we kind of get into jacking off with our brains a little bit, but it's fine.
This is my favorite part.
It's the end of the show, and this is okay to do because sometimes it could lead to something that, like having a little fun with your mind, is something that could lead to something useful. So there are people who say that obviously the mainstream media exists for the purpose of setting agendas.
Yes.
Right. So a lot of what, and this is talked about in, going back to Edward Bernays. So this is a real thing. Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, said, and Chomsky has talked about this in a lot of his writing, that public opinion needs to be prepared.
Right.
For something. And you'll see a lot of these stories, like if you see the things that are happening in society today, and you were able to go back and find these news reports 5 years, 10 years ago, when the idea is introduced and some anchor's like, now what do you think of this? And then they tell the story of this thing that eventually just becomes commonplace. Right. So the media, like the New York Times, and Chomsky actually called the New York Times agenda-setting media, right? That it exists, it serves the state. And that happens because you have a very subservient intellectual class, whether they're in academia or whether they're in the press, and that's what they do. So why is it such a stretch to say that that's what Hollywood does as well?
Right.
So
not a stretch at all.
And how that happens, how that process, that might be incomprehensible to people like us. How an idea starts in the halls of power and ends up in a movie theater.
Right.
Or on a television show. We don't know. But I mean, like sometimes it's so overt and fucking obvious. Like, what's that show with Kiefer Sutherland that comes
24?
out right as the war on terror and the police state crackdown begins in the United States? Right. So now it's heroic to torture and to spy.
Every episode he tortures somebody.
Right.
But it's all for a good cause.
So, I mean, and this is like America, the powers that be in America learned a lot from what the Nazis did in the 30s and the 40s. And strangely enough, the Nazis in the 30s and 40s learned a lot from what the powers that be in America were doing before that. So like Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda in Nazi Germany, was a huge fan of Roosevelt. He loved how Roosevelt just like worked, did his little fireside chats and said, here's what we're going to do. And he liked Bernays. He was real.
There is nothing to fear but spiders.
He was
polio.
He was he was real into Edward Bernays too. Who Bernays served, politicians right up until the Guatemala thing when they invaded Guatemala under this war on communism cover to help a fruit company.
Yeah, the Dole.
Yeah, saying there was like a dictator there, and it was like a mild democratic socialist thing, and they said it was communist. And then getting women to smoke, like all of these things, this is all real. So to say, oh man, those must have been strange days when people plotted how to control the public mind and experimented with people on drugs. Do you think that they got slapped on the wrist and said, we can't do that anymore?
Yeah.
And then went to church together?
Yeah, no. Why would they have stopped doing that? It was working so well.
It seems like all of that shit would just, as we get more clever and we get more resources, you need to remember that those people have them too.
Yeah. True.
You're not going to start talking about fluoride in the water, are you?
I don't know. I don't know enough about that to talk about it.
Okay.
It's not something that I lose sleep over.
Yeah, how much of a difference would it make, really?
What could I do?
There isn't anything you could describe to me that the government might be doing that I would go, no, I don't believe that. That's too horrible. They wouldn't do that. Nothing.
What I try to do, and what I found was very, very frustrating, was to start expending a tremendous amount of mental energy outside of my locus of control. Right? So, I have experience in education. I'm knowledgeable on that subject. My energy goes into that. Right? So if we start doing, I don't understand how Alex Jones just doesn't have a fucking meltdown every day. I mean, he does, but I don't understand why he doesn't have a meltdown where he needs to be put in a psychiatric hospital for a week and then do another show and have the same thing happen. The guy is just so laser focused on every horrible thing every day. I don't understand how somebody has the mental, emotional constitution to be able to do that.
I don't know.
I think it would just be overwhelming. And maybe it shows. I've seen videos of him 15 years ago, and he was a much more mild-mannered guy than he is today, right? But, yeah, I mean, there's only so much. I'm not preaching it's good to be ignorant, but anything like Cory said, anything you tell me that they go up in planes and they spray shit on people. Sure, yeah. Why wouldn't
I believe they would do that.
Why wouldn't they do it?
They
free.
hide the existence of aliens from us.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they would do that.
It's free for them to do it. Taxpayers pay for the chemicals. The airlines pay for the planes.
Now, I'm not
Somehow they
saying
mix
it was
in.
aliens. But if there were, if there were aliens, the government would certainly hide it from us. I bet.
Sure.
And then we just take their technology and like slowly drip feed it to the public. Like, oh, somebody invented the microwave oven.
Did you ever read that book by the guy that supposedly was at Roswell?
Oh yeah,
Ex-CIA
or Area 51.
No.
This guy, I forgot what his name was, but he was one of the on-scene people. I never really researched this to find out exactly how much of it was true, but he was one of the on-site people at the whole Roswell thing, and basically he was tasked after the fact with introducing this found technology into American culture.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really scared about the Reds, the communists at the time. That was the big scare, and they were trying to make sure that the commies didn't benefit from this like fiber optic technology and Kevlar and I don't even remember what else there was, but yeah.
Velcro.
And Tang.
And
the aliens invented Tang.
delicious dry ice cream in a bag.
Yeah.
That is good stuff.
NASA takes all the credit, but that's bullshit. It's the aliens. It's
Well, I mean, all of these things are entirely, like I said, when you're evaluating conspiracies, and this is what we said in the moon landing show, the first thing that a lot of people do is they have this, hard default skepticism of that's preposterous, and I'm willing to look at anything and say, is it plausible, and is there like a contextual history that supports that idea?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when people talk about chemtrails, which is like the stupidest conspiracy that libertarians have ever heard about, right? And I don't care. I don't believe it. It doesn't, like, there's nothing I can do about it. It's not really something that I'm interested in, right? But, like, okay, so you have a government that's too nebulous and broad and vague to say the government. But you have this organization that these micro institutions exist within, like the NSA and the CSA and CIA and God knows what else. And they experiment on black people. They set off bombs and tell black people to walk towards it. They give them syphilis.
Right.
They slip people LSD. Like, are these the kinds of people who would go up in planes and spray shit on people? I think they are.
Oh, absolutely.
But the walkover from this contextual history to proving that is just too far. It's too much resource. It's too much Alex Jones, foaming at the mouth headaches that, and it leads nowhere. What do I learn? That people are, in the end, what's the payoff for me? That I learned that an institution way more powerful than I could ever hope to be is out to get me? Oh, well, shoot. Now I can sleep. Now I can sleep.
Yeah,
well,
exactly. That's what I wonder about, because I know people, and there are people in my family who would always posting stuff about like the weird conspiracies, like chemtrails and stuff like that on their Facebook. And like, what if the truth ever did come out? What would you do then? Like, would that be the thing that made you go, holy crap, this government is no good?
Now, this is what I will say, because we have some friends of the show at tragedyandhope.com, and they explore a lot of these subjects, right, that most of the shows on LRN won't touch. And they do a very good job. And what they've done that was so important to me was they kind of drew this line between there's people like us and there's people like something else.
Yeah.
There's like there's human beings, and then there's predators of human beings that just also are human beings.
Right.
But prey on other human beings.
Yeah.
So it's just like part of the, like, humans have humans as their predators.
Yes.
Predators of human beings include sharks and lions and human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Also
hippos.
And to understand the whole context, so when you talk about something that sounds like kind of a silly, isolated conspiracy, if you can put it in the context of foundations and organizations and plans that came from intellectuals out of universities and experiments and all of these things, it can start to make more sense. So you can actually have a coherent view in a broader context of like what might really go on. Right. But just to cherry pick these different conspiracies, 3 hours of Alex Jones' show and say, this is going to happen to you, this is going to happen to you, this is going to happen to you. It's just too much. That's not, a fear-free way of approaching these topics. I'm not saying they shouldn't be approached, and if people have time and the interest and they think there's something positive to gain, maybe you know something I don't.
Sure.
I've just never seen that.
Gotcha.
Well,
Well,
that's going to be the end of this recording with